All right. Welcome, everyone. Shall I give it a few minutes, Allison, or jump right in?
I think you can go ahead and jump in. I think people are coming on in.
Okay. Welcome. I'm Sarah Bolton. I'm the virtual host for the Myasthenia Gravis Association. We're so glad that you're here and joining us this evening. I'm joined this evening by Allison Foss, who is the Executive Director of the Myasthenia Gravis Association. If you are new to the MGA, we invite you to check out our website, www.mgakc.org, to learn more about our programming and upcoming webinars and support groups. Specifically, we want to point out that our 64th annual meeting and educational seminar is taking place on Saturday, October 26th, 2024, from 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. You can attend in person in Kansas City or virtually, and it's free to attend. So please go to our website again, www.mgakc.org, to register. This evening, we are excited to have with us Dr. Henry Kaminski, who serves as the Meta A. Neumann Professor of Neurology at the George Washington University, to share with us what MG care will look like in 20 years from now. So, Dr. Kaminski, will you take it away?
Absolutely. And it's a pleasure to be online here with you. And as I said, feel free to interrupt um, the discussion. And so let me launch into this. This is not the typical presentation. It's going to be very forward thinking, but based in reality. So let me get to this. And so what's the basis of my thoughts here? There is a revolution going on in science and medicine right now. And I'm not sure how appreciative necessarily the general public is, but the basic understanding of biology, or at least the understanding or greater understanding of the immune system and just how the human body works, is going at breakneck speed, right? So I've been in clinical medicine and in research for a few decades, and every couple weeks there is a new, unbelievable, new insight going on in basic understanding of just medicine. And then that bodes well for development of specific drugs that are going to benefit patients with myasthenia. But as myasthenia is a rare disease. And so it's heterogeneous, right? So there's lots of different subtypes of myasthenia. And our ability to use large data sets through electronic health records, and then to have the kind of tools to analyze large pieces of information, is starting to skyrocket. And as we'll go on further, the technologies to assess health are also being developed and refined. And then everybody hears about artificial intelligence, and there's many aspects to that, but that also will allow us to interrogate these large data sets and use these new discoveries to advance care. So now I'm going to just turn to what I mean by that. So you don't have to necessarily just believe me, but there's a number of very smart people across the United States and the world who are making this bold claim here that technological advances put the annual doctor visit on the critical list. And I would say it's not just the annual doctor visit, but the follow-up. So just to quote Michael Bloom, who's the Chief Digital Transformation Officer at UCSF, let me pause there. There was no such thing as a digital transformation officer at any institution 3 years ago. And it's not like they're just making up terms here. This is because there's a significant need to be able to utilize these technologies, gene sequencing, AI, as I mentioned, to really advance care of patients. So what do we mean about this? I mean about this. So as you know, blood sugar monitoring, it used to be pricking your finger and putting a test strip of blood on to get an idea of your blood sugar. Now, one has a monitor that one can place on the skin, and you get a continuous measure of blood sugar. And with that, we're learning quite a bit on the variations amongst individual humans in how they metabolize food and how it affects their blood sugars. Obviously, medications that do the same, like prednisone. But this allows a more individualized understanding of a person's metabolism beyond just, oh, I have a high blood sugar and I need to use insulin. And then you continue on with that. To disengage my laser pointer. Many of you are probably now wearing a smartwatch or a Fitbit to be able to monitor your heart rate, detect atrial fibrillation. Apple just came out with a more advanced method to monitor sleep, which they're going to try to have FDA approved as a true detector of sleep apnea. So those are the things I think we all can kind of relate to, but there's more technology coming down the pike. So here is just one example, electronic socks that can determine normal walking speed, unsteadiness, and fall detection. That was the goal here in this investigation. So there's the gait stability. It'll also check your body temperature, sweat, the electrolytes in your sweat, but also can monitor other electrolytes instead of going to LabCorp and getting a blood test. And just to go further with this, one will have all these kind of metrics, which then can be collected via your smartphone or any smart device that doesn't have to be necessarily a smartphone. And then that information is placed into the electronic cloud, which then can go to your physician, your general practitioner, and get a succinct report on basically your state of general health. In our case, as we'll be talking about, ability to understand and potentially predict worsening of myasthenia gravis so that physicians can intervene and prevent an exacerbation, prevent you from going into the hospital. There's a lot to that, right? I understand that just detection is one thing, and then it's integration of getting appropriate treatment in a rapid fashion is very critical. But I certainly have patients who wait to the last minute to tell me that they're not doing well, and then it makes it very difficult to keep them out of the hospital. So I see this as a significant advance over the next years. Now, I do want to point out that right now, we don't have everything figured out. And as you'll see, there's rigorous ways to test these technologies, evaluate these technologies so that they're used correctly. But I'll also show you an example of how impactful these can be. So this is an example from Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So just to tell you a little bit about this disease, this is a muscle disease that affects primarily boys and is devastating, right? These children, by the time they're in their 20s, all of them are in wheelchairs. And there's been various attempts to impact their quality of life and improve their strength. So many of those things have been positive. Corticosteroids, for example, or prednisone is commonly used in patients. There's certain gene replacement therapies that are approved and then under development. And so when one does clinical trials in any disease, you need to have a way to measure improvement. And this is kind of a multifaceted issue, right? Because it's not just, especially in a child saying, yeah, I'm better. You can't count on that. You really need to have a rigorous measure when you're trying to assess the value and the impact of any sort of treatment to make it worthwhile. So the community of scientists that take care of patients with muscular dystrophy went out to identify a better outcome measure, which is what it's called, the measure of how a patient is doing. So as you'll see, and this will be repeated in the next slide, these kind of watches, that look like they're actually placed on the child's ankle, and it allows measurement not only of how many steps the individual is taking, but how quickly they're walking, how much they're walking, the stability of that walking. And so this is a very sophisticated device that interrogates the activity level of this patient who has a muscle disease. And so you can imagine that's a pretty good thing to try to be able to do in understanding the status of an individual. So first of all, how is this device used? This is a very busy slide. I'll just point out to you what the important things are here. And just to start off with, when one has a clinical outcome measure, you really want to make sure it's as good as it can be and is validated by other measures. So in terms of this measure, first, the question is does it work? And does it compare well to existing measures? So there was this 6-minute walk test. So basically how far a child can walk over the course of 6 minutes. Does this bracelet measure correlate well to the existing measure? And it did, right? So this is where it's going. There's a relatively small study, but it did correlate with what was existing. So that how this is just in the 6-minute walk test, right? So how reliable is the measure? So this was, again, a second evaluation, and they could see over time the variability in the measure was very accurate. So within 4%, right? So they're saying, okay, this actually works and is consistent across studies, and again continues to compare well to existing measures. So now this becomes even more important. There's other measures like this here. You see here the 6-minute walk test, the North Star ambulatory assessment. That's another measure used in muscular dystrophy. Climbing tests, a little bit larger. And so here you're seeing there's, again, a good correlation with all these other measures that were considered the gold standard. And then you want to see if things change over time, right? So it's not just these short periods of time, but they did a full 6-month study in patients to see that you can actually see a decline in the function of that child, which is sadly what happens in muscular dystrophy. There's a considerable decline over time. And 6 months is a relatively short time, but it's detectable and it correlates to other measures. And I would argue that now this is the gold standard. And actually, as you'll see, the FDA I'll just tell you, the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, that approves use of outcome measures, said that this is the gold standard. And the European organization that does the same thing also said that this should be used in all treatment trials for muscular dystrophies. So I don't want to get too much into the jargon. When you design a clinical trial, you have to determine how many patients you need in that. And you need to determine how significant your treatment you expect it to be. So you're not necessarily looking for a small change. You're looking for a reasonable improvement in function. In this case, the measure that's being used to assess whether a patient is better. So just let me restate that. You use this device, you place it in a group of patients who are on placebo, and then a group of patients who are actually getting an active drug treatment. But before you do that, you can't just say, oh, we're going to do 100 patients. You have to do rigorous statistics to determine how many patients you need. And so that's a critical item here. So in a rare disease, you can't recruit 300 patients for a drug study. You can, but then it'll take for a long period of time. So in myasthenia, the trials have been varied from like 125 to 200 subjects, but then that has required collaboration and inclusion of centers from across the world to be able to get that number of patients. So because of the variability in the measures we use, which I think some of you know, the MGADL, that's the primary outcome measure we use in myasthenia clinical trials. There's a lot of imprecision in that. And so that's why we need what still might be a small number compared to stroke trials, which are in the thousands, but 150. So here's the bottom line from the impact of this new measure. So you do these calculations, you only need 14 patients to see a significant difference. Now, no pharmaceutical company, no investigator would run a trial only on 14 patients, but that's because you want to get an idea of the safety signal as well, which is not determined this. But you can get a measure in a 6-month trial of a drug in Duchenne's using this ankle acceleration measure in a very small number of patients. So that's how it will then speed the efforts in a clinical trial. So there's a lot of groups in each individual disease that are trying to use these kind of measures. And so now I'm going to turn to some of the things that we're doing at George Washington University with my colleagues here. And I'll just give you the bottom line of what we want to do. We want to be able to have a system where we can do a quantitative neuromuscular examination for patients in our clinics or outside of the clinic via telemedicine. Doesn't matter where the evaluator is in the world, doesn't matter where the patient is, and it crosses time measures, so much more kind of convenient. So let me tell you our first steps of doing this. So this all really comes out of the pandemic, when our research network, which had been poised to do a natural history study collecting patient information over the course of 2-year period, all of a sudden 2020, everything shuts down. Research patients in general are not coming into the clinics. So our research design is gone. But fortunately, we were able to kind of think about this. Neurologists had switched and patients had switched to telemedicine. And so Dr. Guidon at Mass General, a group of us developed just basically guidelines on how to do a telemedicine examination for patients with myasthenia. So really like, okay, if you're going to be seeing a patient, do an examination, this is what you should do. And then this work was published. And then the next question became, well, let's see how good this is. And so we did an evaluation where we had a neuromuscular expert do a telemedicine examination like this. And we videotaped those things. And then we had another examiner, another neuromuscular expert, look at these exams and do this scoring. So the actual examiner did the scoring, and then the reviewer one, and then reviewer two. And if they didn't agree, there'd be a third person to identify, to provide a full score. And just let me tell you, this scoring, mild, moderate, severe, on these measures is what's typically done in a clinical trial. This is very similar to quantitative myasthenia gravis score that would be done in a drug trial for myasthenia. So it's not like we just made this stuff up. This was really based on existing work. So all of a sudden, we have all these videotapes. Turned out to be 102 on 51 patients because we did it twice. And I'd like to introduce this the following way. A neurologist and a applied mathematician walk into a bar, and this is what's happened. I told my colleague, Mark Garbe, the applied mathematician, like, we've got all these videos. I said, oh, that's very interesting. I should be able to analyze them in a quantitative fashion, which is better than just mild, moderate, severe. And so that was the starting point, these 102 videos. And as you'll see, we're able to quantitate the abnormalities on examination. I guess we had a few more videos. But let me jump into this to tell you how we did this. So I'm sure all of you have had the experience of, looking up for 1 minute so the neurologist can detect ptosis. It's very annoying. It's not fun. But we were able to use this to detect abnormalities, right? So first, let me go through, show you the video. All right, so recorded video. And I'll tell you how we get these things in a moment. And then over time, we're able to judge the severity of the eyelid droop. And so kind of two things there. It's not mild, moderate, severe. We actually have a time point, and we can have the slope of how this eyelid droop is developed. So at first, when you look at this, you'd say, okay, well, that sounds kind of easy, right? You just draw lines. But we wanted an automated process, right? So we all know that there's facial recognition software. If you, when you go to the airport, your face is scanned, your retinas are scanned. So we already had, or there already exists, a large database on how to identify landmarks through computer vision in patients. I mean, there is a challenge here because these are not diverse data sets. And by that, I mean, it's really very much East Coast white males that are used in what's called this DLib database. So there's some challenges with that. And, we observe this, but then we could identify, from existing information, where's the eyelid, where's the lower lid, where's the upper lid. So like from a computer vision standpoint, this is not like completely obvious, right? I mean, there's a lot involved in this. And then we laboriously, fortunately it wasn't me, looked at whether the computer vision was actually doing what we wanted it to do. So these are these green lines to verify we're getting the right anatomical measures. And so for ptosis, we evaluated our patients, and you can see, some were very good. This is 100%, no drift. There's some patients who, between their 2 visits, have ptosis that's progressing over the course of the 1 minute. And then we have, in contrast, a very diverse group of control subjects with no neuromuscular disease. We made a point of not just recruiting college students. That would have been easy. We went out, and our oldest patient was 82 years old, Japanese woman, and we had 25% African American participation, and across the age range from 18 to 82. These are the individuals above the age 70, and they're tracking normally, as I said, and including some of the patients were elderly. But this is a much better quantitative metric than Dr. X saying no ptosis, Dr. Z saying it's Y ptosis. And I'll just tell you from another study we did, there's a great deal of variability amongst our examiners in how they grade droopy eyelids and double vision. And so that, if you start thinking about a clinical trial that's doing these measures, that leads to greater variability. And then that goes to the point of needing greater numbers in a clinical trial. So obviously we did this for other individuals and had, other metrics. Arm drift, I'll just tell you, this person, when I examined them in clinic just 30 minutes before this, had no symptoms of weakness and no, complaints. No weakness on my static examination. But with our system, we're actually able to identify the drift down the arms. The control patients are 82-year-old or 70-year-olds, no problems. And so this is really picking up mild weakness. And this is also very important to the field, I think, because mild weakness is often missed by all our other quantitative myasthenia gravis score and the myasthenia gravis ADL. This is just a summary again across patients. As you can see, all the controls were in good situation. So we came to the conclusion that we can use all these measures to quantitate the examination in a number of patients. And so me being a clinical trials person, I was thinking, okay, well, this is great because now we can have trained individuals at a single site doing these examinations for across the world, instead of having to train somebody in Los Angeles and Kansas City and New York City and Tokyo and Paris to do these examinations in the same fashion, in a rigorous way across the world. And oh, by the way, each center is only recruiting a couple patients, so they may lose that research coordinator who's trained to do these. You have to retrain somebody. So the idea is, like, if you have a central area, central clinical trial unit that is doing all these examinations, there's going to be less variability. But then we thought, well, we've got this computer vision that's seeing the patient, and there's the chat GPT that can talk back at you depending on the questions you have and can give instructions. So we thought, well, we could even eliminate the exam.
We're not able to hear what she's saying.
Oh, wow. So thank you for telling me that.
Yeah.
And
It might just be that the audio from the presentation's not coming through.
Right. So if you have an idea how I can activate that audio, that would be great, because I'm not sure.
I think that's I actually
Oh,
heard.
wait, let's see. Let's just see. I might have.
Strength and deliver an exact medical.
How's that?
That was better. Yeah.
Okay, that was better. Okay. Okay, so you can hear something. So I'm not sure if I can increase the sound on my end, but so far. And then I would ask everybody to try to increase their volume as well. Optimize for video clip. Okay, let's.
Welcome to our medical testing facility. I am happy to guide you through your exam today. I was developed to make the medical testing better and easier. You can interrupt me to ask questions about the exam at any time. The exam will take 10 to 15 minutes. I will provide step-by-step instructions. Our technology will analyze your muscle strength and deliver an exact medical assessment. As soon as we complete the test, the results will be available to you and your physician. Let's start. Well, thanks a lot for your patience with me, but I think we are getting good data for your medical examination. I will provide immediately to Dr. Henry K. the supercomputer vision report that we have been able to run. He will have a copy of the examination to validate the exam we did, and will be happy to answer your questions.
So let me tell you where I think the use for this is, right? I've emphasized kind of the clinical trial needs that need to be very rigorous. But also, I think this can be used in the clinic, prior to arrival of a patient, or if somebody is unstable, one can log into a website to have their examination then sent to their physician. So I think there's multiple potential uses for this kind of technology to monitor patients better. And as I think we all appreciate, it often can be a very brief session that you have with your neurologist. And so if some of the examination time can be done on your own time, that I think leads to some potential benefit for everybody involved. So let me hopefully proceed here. Now, so what I've been talking so far about is really changes in the way physicians and patients interact. So now I'm going to go relatively briefly to a whole new conceptualization that's being applied to medicine to really truly personalize care. So this is a little bit crazy. So I'll just tell you first some examples of what digital twins are in industry. So when Rolls-Royce makes an engine, they make a digital copy, computerized version of that engine. And that engine, the true engine, has numerous sensors on it. And that information is then being fed into this digital twin of that engine to monitor how it's working, with the idea that it can predict maintenance needs and reducing downtime for that plane so that you can be proactively fixing things. Obviously, Boeing doesn't do this. And there's multiple examples in various industries that do this. You can imagine these oil rigs are profoundly complicated devices. And so this industry also creates, Shell specifically here, creates these digital twins to, again, identify critical aspects of their performance. So, engines, fairly complicated. Oil rigs, pretty complicated. Human beings, more complicated, but the same kind of concept is being applied. So why is this important? Well, first of all, if one can get enough information about the biology of a person, and we're doing that, right? So our genomes are being sequenced. At some point, probably every infant when they're born will have their whole genome sequenced. We're able to interrogate thousands of proteins that are floating around in our bodies, as well as metabolites. That goes back to the amazing technologies I was kind of started this talk off with. We can then compare this to, compare the protein expression to what's going on on a genetic level. And then because of the fusion of the health record with all the information biologically that's being developed, one can potentially model a patient with myasthenia gravis. So for example, we get a big data set and we model the autoimmune disease myasthenia gravis. A patient comes into my office and they are a 57-year-old woman who has acetylcholine receptor antibody positive myasthenia. They also have diabetes, high blood pressure. I draw some specific blood tests. We have her genome sequence, and we know the risk factors associated with that patient. We plug it into a computer that does an analysis. It goes through all the medications that are available, and the perfect one for that individual is chosen. Right now, when somebody comes into my clinic and I say, okay, well, you have 90% chance of being better with prednisone, that's a pretty good predictor. But for those 10% of patients who don't get better, which I had 3 in the last week who did not respond well for their ocular myasthenia to corticosteroids, then I can spare them the corticosteroids. Or I have a patient who's particularly susceptible to the side effects of prednisone, or substitute any other medication there, and you can avoid that. Now, we got a long way to go with this. I don't want to imply that this is right around the corner, but there are many groups that are trying to do this specifically. So I don't want to get into this too much. There was a large group from California that collected multiple pieces of information from 1,000 patients. Their metabolites, it's a simple blood test, clinical tests, the echocardiogram, EKG, CT scans of the body. Many of you would have had these, a whole body MRI. There's some groups that do this. I don't think this is a good idea, but this is a research study. The genetics of these patients, and combined everything here to then identify new genetic problems within this cohort of patients. And so here, the ultimate goal, again, is to integrate this omics. And so omics just refers to the proteins, the metabolites, the chemicals that are in your bloodstream, the genes and the transcripts of those genes, as they're called, all together to get as much information and combine it with the clinical, the age and the previous history of the patients, and even further to be able to, hopefully unmask diseases, identify them before they start, put a certain risk profile together so you can predict the patient may develop myasthenia gravis. And so again, it's large groups in Scandinavia that are trying to produce immunological digital twins, are very focused on how the immune system works. And again, I don't want to underestimate the complexity, because you're going from the DNA level to the cells, to all the cells that come together in a tissue, and then to the organ and the whole body, and these all interact together. But that's the vision for 2044 that I'm referring to. So we can really get individualized data Just very briefly, we're trying to use this kind of approach to a large data set that we have from the MGTX trial, which is the phase 3 study clinical trial that demonstrated that thymectomy, removal of the thymus, is effective for patients with acetylcholine receptor positive myasthenia. But the NIH was nice enough to allow us to collect, and the patients, more importantly, to identify patients who, to obtain blood specimens throughout the study. And one thing, thymectomy, as you know, is not a cure. And in this trial, about 30% of patients were not responsive. They're still on high doses of prednisone out to 3 years and even longer, despite addition of other medications like azathioprine and mycophenolate, IVIG, plasmapheresis. So there's a core group of people who are not doing well. So we were able to take this data, and at the time 0, basically at baseline, we had all this information of when they entered the study, and then found that we were able to identify clusters of patients who would fail the prednisone treatment. And so they needed to go on azathioprine as a rescue treatment, which is what we would do in general clinical care. And then we look at these people, like what is predicting their poor performance, so to speak, their poor outcomes. And, we haven't published this data yet, but just to tell you, the number one predictor of doing poorly was a smoking history, which is not something that's come out of any myasthenia trial I've ever heard of, although it is known that smoking puts you at risk for autoimmune diseases, just like aging does. So now a bit of a summary here. I think these 2 items, the ability to do evaluations of patients continuously in their normal lives, is really going to alter the way of physician and patient interact. There's going to be a dashboard that the physician will have to be able to say, okay, this is this metric that's going well, this is getting better, this is not getting better. In terms of the actual examinations, they could be actually done before by trained assistants. And so there's the expectation also that patients have access to their information and be able to monitor themselves, right? I think those people who have a step counter out there are doing that themselves already. And I think that's just going to increase, and hopefully it'll be easier to obtain that data and to transmit it to your physicians. And the ultimate goal, though, is that this gives time for everybody to communicate about treatment in a much better way and not rushed way when you have your in-person clinic visit, because that's also important, right? Physicians are not just data scientists. In fact, most of them are poor data scientists, but they are and should be good communicators and express that empathy and understanding of what the patient is going through, and not just looking at this data. So I don't want anybody to come away from this discussion to think that that's what I'm advocating for. So here's kind of my prediction of what won't exist in 2044. Seronegative myasthenia. I'm very confident with these new technologies that can identify every autoantibody target in a patient in one blood test. Will identify seronegative patients. All these treatments just kind of beat down the immune system in many different ways, and they're not very targeted. So I think we will have antigen, antibody-specific targets to eliminate the cells that are producing myasthenia antibodies and not compromise all the other ones that are producing good antibodies. we'll have much better ways to measure how people are doing. And something I didn't really talk about is being able to predict from the electronic record if a patient may be having myasthenia gravis based on the pattern of the utilization or their blood chemistries and such, to say, have a pop-up to their primary care doctor saying, it looks like these symptoms are consistent with myasthenia gravis. You may want to order this test, and then ask a neurologist to see the patient. So I think, many of the things I have said may sound crazy, but there is this, what's called Amara's law, in that when a new technology is developed, there's a lot of expectation from it and that it's going to save the world. Some people think that AI is going to do that. And then I think also we've seen in the last year is like, well, no, the artificial intelligence makes mistakes. It's not that good. It makes things up, which it does. I don't want to say it doesn't, and then everybody starts to think, well, this is not going to do anything. This is this kind of disillusionment. It's not going to really help us. But then, it becomes adopted, and there's improved productivity from whatever that technology is. I'm sure many of you may recall that the head of Microsoft said that nobody is going to want to have an iPhone. It's just not a useful technology. Well, obviously they were wrong. And so that's Amara's law. We tend to overestimate the effect of technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And just a kind of inspirational quote here. The most reliable way to predict the future is to actually go out and create it. And so I'd like to leave you with that. And certainly this is the group of wonderful people I work with, Dr. Garbe, who's did all the examination evaluations, and our team there, and Dr. Linda Kushner, who runs the Myasthenia Gravis laboratory at GW, and her team there that are doing some of the biological measures that, we hope to produce that ultimate digital twin one day with. So that is the end of my presentation, and I'm going to stop sharing, so I hope to see some people there.
That was so interesting and amazing. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. So any questions out there? I actually have the chat up, and so
thank you so much. Q&A.
It looks like Anita has her hand up.
Is easiest for you.
Yeah, if anybody can just speak up, that'd be great.
It looks like Anita has her hand up. I can push. Anita, I'm gonna push to allow you to talk. Oh gosh.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I was just going to say, I really liked everything that you just shared right now. And one of the main reasons why I like it is because it took me 41 years to get diagnosed. When I was 4 years old, I started with these symptoms, and I had many, I don't even know that they were diagnoses, but basically descriptions of my symptoms along the way. And then finally at 45 years old, I was diagnosed, and an optometrist figured out what it was, because I actually never had ptosis, and I never had diplopia, and I never had bulbar symptoms. My only symptoms were breathing. But what it was that I actually had a very arched eyebrow, like a Spock eyebrow, Mephisto sign. And the optometrist said, you know what? I think that this is your eyelid wants to drop, but it's not. So he sent me to the ophthalmologist. Ophthalmologist ordered blood work. Here's the thing. So months later, my brother was like, you know what? And this is before they changed ChatGPT. He put in my symptoms and he said, oh, see, ChatGPT works better than doctors. Because I had gone to over 50 doctors, 8 neurologists, 7 ophthalmologists, 1 neuro-ophthalmologist. and hematologists, endocrinologists, rheumatologists, I mean, just for years and years and years begging, and nobody even ever suspected MG. And I had very competent, good physicians. It's just that the way in which the presentation of the disease is very, very tricky. I did always have an off-center iris, little things that doctors don't think about. Those autonomic symptoms, a lot of us with MG have those prior to showing obvious symptoms like diplopia and like bulbar symptoms and things like that. Anyway, I told my brother, I said, that's not fair. Go back, and I want you from my medical records to put in the initial symptoms that I had, let's say, well, not initial, because then you'd have to go back to when I was 4. But I said, let's go back at when I was 25. Put in those symptoms, see what it does. And he put them in from my medical records, and ChatGPT came up with my diagnosis or potential diagnosis. And I still have a copy of everything that my brother put in because I had him screenshot it all. So everything that you're saying, I know you said a bunch of times, like, this may sound crazy to people, but it doesn't sound crazy. Because I'll tell you what, when you get something that's sort of more objective and remove some of that subjectivity that sometimes, you know, as human beings, we look to each other for cues and things like that. And when you remove that and put more of that objectivity, yes, there's a cost there, but there's also a gain there. And what that chat GPT proved to me was that for me, it would have been a gain. It would have meant, it was, when I got diagnosed, incidentally, the medication, once I started on the Mestinon, I mean, the first day was amazing. And obviously it doesn't stay like that, but it made a huge difference to me. I went from barely being able to keep a job that paid $60,000 a year. And I do have a Juris Doctorate, but I was never able to work in that. I don't even know how I made it through college or law school with undiagnosed MG. But anyway, right after I got diagnosed, I got a job making $40,000 more because I felt like I would be competent and able to do so. So this can make a huge, huge difference in someone's life.
No, I mean, thank you for the comments. And, you know, obviously I agree with what you said about the technological assessments. You know, like with every kind of new, as I said, new technology, there's some pushback on this. You know, when the stethoscope was first developed, you know, people didn't think it was a reasonable thing to do. You could just continue to put your ear next to the chest. And it's just, you know, that the same throughout medical history. I regret.
Somebody's got to start it. Somebody's got to be somebody has to be the pioneer. Somebody has to say it. And otherwise that dialogue's never going to happen.
Right. And you know, yeah, I'll tell you, and I'm sure, you know, you've also had these kind of stories, even with Google, to put in your symptoms and you know, develop a diagnosis. And I've had patients who've gone to their primary care doctor and said, look, I'd like you to test me for myasthenia gravis. And like, oh, by the way, it actually comes back with a positive acetylcholine receptor antibody, right? Then they get referred to me. So, I mean, this is just, you know, just a better step. I mean, I do think, like with many things, it's an addition to the examination.
Right.
It's just, it's another way to evaluate a patient for a diagnosis, right? And so I do use ChatGPT also with that to you know, identify a list of potential diagnoses that prompt me to think about a patient in a different way, right?
Right.
So
I think that, yeah, it's complementary. I think, obviously,
yes.
I mean, I like to see a person. I like to talk to a person, but at the same time, I think that it can be a wonderful tool and a wonderful addition. And it's just providing another complementary option to, you know, to be able to get to a diagnosis for that patient. Because I know for physicians, I know that I know my case was not easy. It's once I read about myasthenia and, you know, what they believe that, you know, how medicine looks at the presentation and the symptoms, I saw why it was so difficult to diagnose me, because there are us outliers that maybe don't necessarily, like I said, don't show those, 3 of those 4 big hallmarks. I didn't show them. So.
Yeah, but as I'm sure you know, that's true for many patients with myasthenia, even when they have quote unquote classic symptoms, right? There's long delays in diagnosis.
Yeah, and I'm a big right now, like a big advocate of, anything like this that could help us, because and if you looked at me in person, and I've had neurologists tell me this to my face, because I'm seropositive on all the ACHRs, and if you looked at me as a person, it's very obvious why it was missed. You just can't see it. But I could feel it. So I don't know. I think that everything you said, like I said, I know you said it sounds crazy, but nope. I loved everything that you said, and I will share it. I have a group, and I will share it with all of them what you said.
Cool.
And thank you for doing such a good job, and for investing in us, because this really is a very, very difficult and debilitating disease.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any other questions, comments?
It looks like we have one other hand up. Dr. Kaminski, do you want us to put them?
Yeah.
Allow them to. Okay.
Sure. Absolutely.
Mike, I'm going to come to you next.
I don't know. I'm not
yeah, I just said the chat is disabled. However, the Q&A is working.
Oh.
That's probably why no one's been asking questions.
That's okay. I don't. Thank you, Mike. Did you have a question?
No, I just made a comment in QA to make sure it worked.
Okay. All right.
But I did mean it.
Thank you. That's interesting. I turned on the chat, but I don't know what happened. Oh. Okay. I think I pushed it again. So if there's any questions, please drop them in the chat or in the Q&A.
Okay. I don't think we're getting anything.
A lot of folks saying thank you. Thank
Yep.
you for the presentation. It was really enlightening. Thank you. Also, it's not as obvious for.
Yep, I see those. That's great. Well, thank you very much. I mean, if you want to email me some questions that may come up, that would be great. And here in DC, it's an hour later, so I've got to walk my dog and thank my wife for giving me the time to do this.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to spend with us. We really appreciate it.
No, it's always a pleasure to talk. Take care.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.